Yeah, we got it. Yeah, we got it. We got it. You got it. Daily Solutions Podcast. Alright, I think we got it enough now. Enough getting. We already got the intro. It's all good. Good intro. And wrapping it up. And finally, yeah, close it down. Daily Solutions Podcast. I'm just gonna go lay down. You wanna maybe just wake me up when the podcast
Is that good, or should we do that again?
All right.
Hey,
that was Ashkahn
Yeah.
on beats there.
Yep. Laying it down.
That was me, Graham, on snoring, I guess is really what that was. And today's question for you is float tanks are really expensive. Yeah, noticed that too. I was trying to get used float tanks, but I'm wondering how I even choose them. Is there anything I should look out for to avoid in a used float tank?
So, good news. The good news is that I think used float tanks are pretty good. Like they're surprisingly resilient. They hold up well to time. Like for the most part, like in terms of buying generally used items, I think float tanks are on like the good end of the spectrum. Like they tend to be pretty decent, even if they're secondhand.
Yeah, and it obviously depends too on the age of the float tank and stuff like that. I remember talking to one of our apprentices who was grabbing a old husk for an Oasis tank out of someone's backyard. It's been sitting there for 5 years or something, exposed to the elements.
Yeah, but as far as like buying used things go, I think float tanks are, it's not like out of the question. I would totally be
right. Yeah. And if you can save a little bit of money on buying a used tank, often that's a nice way to get started in the industry, if you just don't have a huge startup pool of capital.
Yeah.
The bad news is they're a little hard to find. I think there are more people out there who want used float tanks than there are people selling used float tanks, which means you kind of just have to stumble across them at the right time. It's
good news for you if you have float tanks.
Right.
You should have a pretty easy time selling them.
And the resale value seems to be pretty reasonable too.
Yeah.
With the caveat like everything, where if you need to sell it right now, and you're moving town, you just don't want to take the float tank with you. It'll probably cost a little bit more, cost you more. You'll sell it for less. That's what I'm trying to say here.
So, what to look out for if you're buying a used float tank? What do you want to be careful of?
So, were you going to answer your own question?
I got a few things, but you can go first.
No, thank you. I just assumed because you were asking a question that you wanted an answer. So I was going to say let's start with the body. Like ignoring the filtration stuff and anything like that, like just the body of the float tank. Bubbling, if it's a fiberglass float tank, is definitely something to look at. Okay, so let me back up a little bit here. One of the things that's a nice shortcut for this is finding out when the last time the float tank was used.
Yeah, and where it's been stored in the meantime.
Yeah.
Like a float center or a float tank from an up and running float center is probably in pretty good condition.
Right, like they're currently running floats in it right now.
Yeah.
And it's just they're going to swap out that tank for a different one or a new model or something like that. And they're looking to get rid of that in the process.
A float tank that has been sitting in someone's backyard with a tarp over it for the last 20 years.
Also probably great candidate.
Don't see anything wrong there.
Buy immediately.
And it had the tarp. So that's one. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty obvious, right? Like because float tanks have been around for a while, and then when you see used ones, sometimes they're very old. They're 20, 30 years old, which again, still can work. Like we see float centers with 20-year-old float tanks they bought used up and running, doing well. So if they've been stored in kind of decent condition, like that's not like, again, a deal breaker for me.
Yeah, no, certainly not. And especially if you don't mind doing some small maintenance or repairs, little fix-ups on things like that. I mean, it's not even uncommon to find used float tanks with a completely broken filtration system, or one that's just so old and dysfunctional anyway that it's worth scrapping and starting from the beginning, you know? I'm thinking of old what do we have?
Floatariums?
Yeah, floatariums specifically.
So here's what I was going to say as kind of a general piece of advice. It's nicer to buy a used float tank from a manufacturer that still exists.
That is a good one, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Because, there's some manufacturers that have been around for a long time, and there's some used float tanks that have only been used for a year or two. But there's also a lot of float tanks out there from... Floatarium is definitely the biggest one I see. Floatarium was a big manufacturer back in the 80s. They're no longer a company. And you see a lot of used old floatariums out there. And the
By
problem...
a lot, we mean like 5 that we've seen or something. But
no,
in the float tank world,
there's enough. Like, when I see a used float tank in a center, like, there's a good chance it's a floatarium. I mean, maybe this is changing recently with newer float tanks, but... 5 years ago or something, like almost every used float tank I saw was a floatarium.
Not like Oasis or Samadhi?
And some Oasis and Samadhi. I'm just saying there's a disproportionate amount of floatarium tanks out there for a manufacturer that hasn't been around for that many years.
We're on the same page, I think. Okay,
so here's the problem, is that you can't, to continue this thought here, that you can't... what do? You can't like find replacement pieces. If something's broken, you have to kind of re-engineer that part of the float tank yourself. And, there's very likely to be some things that are broken.
If it's a floatarium, very likely the heaters,
for
example.
Classic
We still
problem.
get calls occasionally about people being like, yeah, I found this old floatarium thing, but it doesn't seem to heat when I plug it in.
Heaters seem to be broken. Yeah. You can't call floatarium, That's the basic issue. If there are existing manufacturers, they're usually cool with you calling and ordering replacement parts from them or whatever it is to get the float tanks kind of back up and running.
And yeah, I mean, Samadhi is a great example of that. Like I've heard so many stories from customers where they're giving support on tanks that have probably been sold through 3 different owners and are 20 years old now, and they're still happy to give advice and help those people along. So it also helps, I think, that we're in a very kind of small and generous community of float people here. I can imagine buying a car that's 20 years old and trying to get support on it, and they're like, dude, you bought a used car, like you're on your own,
Especially if the car company doesn't exist anymore. So yeah, that's one thing, whether the company exists, what shape the kind of general tub itself is in.
Yeah, and so some things to look for. This is what I was going to start with, but I'm glad we rewound a little bit, Bubbling in the fiberglass is of course a big one. That's something that you'll see pop up after several years, or maybe even around year 5 or 6 or something like that. Is you can get some bubbling in the finish, which isn't the worst thing. It just means you'll probably have to spend some money fixing it up and getting that patched, getting it resurfaced basically before you put it live.
Same with chips. You might see chips off of the kind of top coat of the fiberglass, or sometimes you'll see cracks, like an actual crack in the system.
Yeah, and cracks in the fiber. I mean, everything can be patched. Like fiberglass is kind of just this either spray on bits of fiber or sheets of fiber. Yeah, exactly. So everything, that's the nice thing about fiberglass systems, is they are totally manually patchable and refinishable. So unless something is really compromising the structural integrity of the lid or the basin or something like that, it's not the end of the world, but just know that's extra dollar signs that are being added on to the used tank to get it in good condition.
Yep. I'd say the door is another quick place to look. It's kind of just one of the places that is most likely to have something messed up with it. They get used a lot. They're usually like pretty intense hinges or pistons or whatever is going on with the door.
Some of the old ones just have hinges that, weren't made to be used 100,000 times before they had problems.
So that's make sure that's in good working order. It can be one of the like kind of harder things to repair properly is the door system.
Stepping into the tank, pay attention to how much the basin is still supporting your weight. Is it flexing when you're going in there? Is anything weird about the weight load? Are you actually feeling the tub shift when you're going in there? Because that could also be a sign that something is losing structural integrity just on the bottom of the tank.
And I guess like the actual plumbing connections that connect to the filtration system, those are another weak point where things could be especially if a tank's been moved around a lot, like those pieces could be jostled and the actual piece parts where the pipes connect to the float tank could be loose or need a little bit of work done to make sure they're nice and watertight.
And how do you check that out if the tank isn't in working order and it's just in storage?
I'd say just visually. I mean, just look and see like if it's super messed up or not. Like, and if it looks okay, then it's probably going to be relatively okay. If you put another layer of whatever,
Yeah, maybe give it a little jiggle.
Yeah,
Kick the side a tiny bit, see if anything moves.
and then generally the filtration system. That's probably one of the more likely places you're going to have to replace something, especially if it's old. Like if the pumps or whatever has just been sitting around for a real long time, or people were just using different equipment back in the day than they are now.
Yeah, you will see some really intense setups on some of the used float tanks if you actually go around and start shopping around. You're just like, I have never seen anything like this. Like, that's what a filter unit looked like back in the day? It's crazy.
And, all this is true of probably older float tanks much more than it is a float tank that was bought new a few years ago or something. Like, in that case, it's probably not that likely that there's going to be very much wrong with it.
It's true. If I hear about a 12-year-old Oasis, there's a different kind of regimen of examining it that I'm going to give as opposed to a 2-year-old, anything from whatever's being manufactured now.
Yeah, like in those cases, like it's very rare I see float tanks in any sort of condition other than like pretty great.
Yeah, and it's something else that you can protect yourself with by a contract with the person selling the tank, right? Like if you're asking all these questions about the condition of it and when the last time it was used and whether it was in good working condition when it was taken down or if it's still in use, getting that in writing, just saying, hey, if the filtration system doesn't work, despite you saying that it was all packed up fine and worked when you took it down, then we need to re-examine this price, or there's a pre-built-in discount in the contract or something like that, right? Because if they did have a problem with it and they are trying to just offload something, which I wouldn't like to think of anyone in our industry, but you need to protect yourself anyway, there's kind of no telling, right? Like until you fill it up with water and get it going, if it's just in a garage, dry and sealed away, everything can look completely fine from the outside, and the UV light could just not turn on when it plugs in, or things could not be watertight in the filter setup, or there's, to a certain extent, an amount that you won't know about what shape the filtration system is even in until you get it connected.
Yeah, but it's not really a story I hear too commonly, which is nice. I don't hear a lot of people like, there's no like used tank salesman sort of stereotype, with like a used tank lot, and they're just trying to like move lemons off the lot and selling people garbage. So most of the time when people are buying used tanks, the people are kind of upfront about what's working, what isn't working, and that tends to somewhat reflect reality. Or otherwise, it's just been a long time and the person didn't know, that some system failed in the 20 years it's been sitting in storage or whatever.
Yeah, no, it's one of the really nice things about being in, again, such a kind of close-knit and generous industry with people who float a lot. But again, definitely do get a contract in place, do take steps to protect yourself. Like buying a used tank, especially if it's relatively new, is still a really big purchase. And with a manufacturer, you'll have the warranty and things like that. With a used tank, you don't always get that luxury. So
yeah,
something to talk to your lawyer about, honestly. Like once you are doing a sale contract, they can let you know the things to write in that will help protect you as well. Which, by the way, we are not lawyers, which I just kind of feel the need to toss out there for some reason.
Small plug, maybe a quick moment for a little plug. We run a website called usedfloattanks.com.
Yep, and it's barely even a plug because we take no money from it
really
at all.
Yeah,
where it's just kind of a community listserv where people
just
go
built
up
it one weekend. It seemed fun.
Yeah,
so.
list their used float tanks, and then people who are interested sign up, and they get emails when new used float tanks are listed / new people signing up get a list of all the current used float tanks. So, no guarantees, but it's a nice place to hopefully just get the word out there and, maybe even secure a buyer or a used float tank, depending on which side of the merchant equation you're on.
Yeah. I also have heard of people buying used float tanks on Craigslist.
Oh, yeah.
More than I would think. But, that totally seems to be a place where... I can't imagine selling a float tank and being like, I should put this on Craigslist. That's where...
kind of shot. Okay, so I guess they didn't ask that question, but what are some other places where you can find
answer
used?
it.
Yeah. We don't even need questions anymore, just nothing but answers.
So, the usedfloattanks.com, Craigslist,
eBay.
eBay, yeah, that's true. I've seen them on eBay for sure. And kind of float forum sites like the Float Collective group on Facebook is the biggest one that I see float tanks for sale on.
Yep. And Yeah, I do see those pop up still.
Yeah.
There for sure.
And occasionally some manufacturers will kind of keep track of it. They'll have a customer
that is true.
say that they, a center is whatever, going out of business or moving or getting rid of their tanks, and they'll contact the manufacturer they bought them from. And the manufacturer sometimes will take them and then, sell them used to somebody else. So that's an option as well.
Yep, or just, redirect them to that person. If someone's calling a manufacturer and the new tanks are a little out of budget, they might just say, oh, well, we have this person trying to unload some used units and just kind of make the connection happen.
Yep.
So, manufacturer direct used sales. I don't know, maybe just, put up a float tank wanted ad, in the local paper, I think is.
Yeah, just go around holding a sign looking for float tank.
Will work for float tank. Yeah.
All right, that seems like all the advice
seems
we have to give.
Kinda
that's about it.
Winding this down, yeah.
All right, if you guys have other questions you want to ask us, go to floatanksolutions.com/podcast.
Ship them on over to us.
That's right. Yeah, used questions are fine too.
Secondhand float tank questions.
All right, well, bye. We'll talk to you later.
Bye, everyone.